Welcome. Welcome to the Elevate Review Panel. This is the Individual and Creative Businesses Panel 1, Day 2. I'm Anne Marie McCaskill Davis, and I am the Cultural Arts Division staff facilitator for this panel. My role here is to essentially move the panelists along, maintain the 10-minute time review for each panel or application that we review, and to provide any context relating to the cultural funding guidelines for the Elevate program. I would also like to introduce Patricia Hayes. She is our facilitator as well today. Priscilla, if you'd like to add any additional comments.
Hello, everyone. Patricia Hayes. I'm here on behalf of the city as an independent facilitator to help maintain the equity goals that the city seeks to put into maintaining this process. So I'm much more to be here as a silent observer and just help keep the process moving along. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. So let's talk a little bit about what you'll be experiencing today for this panel process. Panelists have reviewed all applications assigned to them prior to today. They've provided scores and comments, which is what they will be referring to as they make their presentations today for each application. Additionally, they will not be providing a numeric score, but just providing overall comments on the application and areas of improvement for future applications. Application reviews are capped at 10 minutes each. So once we approach 10 minutes, I'll start making calls at the 3-minute mark, 2 minute, 1 minute, and 30 seconds. And then I'll just end the panel discussion right as 10 minutes hits. We'll stop the recording and timer for any tech issues if they arise. Panelists generally aren't going to repeat comments unless they just really want to reiterate what has been said. Keep in mind that panelists are not scoring on consensus, so it's totally fine for one panelist to have one take of an application and another panelist to have a different interpretation. What else? The comments that the panelists will be providing will be aligning with the review criteria set forth in the Elevate grant guidelines. They are also have been instructed to look beyond grantsmanship. If the information lies within the application, they are allowed to take that into consideration, even if that information was not within the answer to a particular question, but if it was found elsewhere, they're allowed to take that into consideration. Panelists are also allowed to use firsthand knowledge and firsthand experience. However, they are not allowed to take into consideration hearsay or something that they've heard from another party about the applicant or the applications that they are reviewing. They're also allowed to review the applicant's website if that was provided. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will turn off their cameras during that panel, that particular application review, and they have not scored or provided comments for that application. Let's see, I think that covers it. We can go ahead and get started. I have the timer pulled up here for 10 minutes, or I did. 1 second, here we go. So we're going to go ahead and begin reviewing the applications. The first application today up for review is Carmen Alvarez. Sandy will be the primary, who's basically, the primary's role is basically to just be the first person to talk about the application and give some basic summary of the application, and then they'll dive into their own comments. And then the secondary is there to provide additional comments, and then we open it up the floor to the rest of the panelists to provide any additional information that they'd like to share. So Sandy, you are the primary for this application and Bridget is the secondary. So Sandy, I will start the timer as soon as you begin speaking.
Thank you. So for this proposal, the activities proposed were a series of events and workshops to celebrate cultural art, food, and traditions. I was really moved by the applicant's previous work of altar building. I can imagine that these events were very healing and meaningful for those who attended. I ended up scoring this application mid-high. It was a bit hard for me to gauge who exactly the applicant's intended constituency was. At one point, they talked about wanting these activities to be open to all. At another point, they talked about wanting this to specifically be for minority communities. But some of the parts that I really enjoyed about the application was, their history of service, their mission, how they really wanted to promote and celebrate Mexican culture, tradition, and foods. So even though I was uncertain about the constituency, I still did award them the full points because I could see the impact of this work. I did want to get a bit more detail about, what they thought the cultural interests and needs of their community were and how those activities met those details. I kind of got like an outline of what the activities, like more, I felt more like a list really of what the activities were, but I just wanted a bit more detail so I could better understand like what exactly are the activities.
So on this one, I scored this medium high, and like Sandy mentioned, there was a very broad scope of proposed activities, and I wanted more detail if I could to kind of think about it in total, to know about the collaborators and the other partners that would be making all of these programs come forward or come about. I did appreciate a lot that there was an intentional marketing plan and looking at Spanish dominant media in Austin. I thought that made a lot of good sense with this one. And I think in terms of the budget, it would have helped me as I was reviewing it better understand the proposed activities if the budgeting had been more broken down or had more narrative detail included in it, so I could help kind of see the scope of things.
Thanks, everyone. Any additional comments? If there are none, Anne-Marie.
Thank you. All right, panelists, go ahead and finalize your scores. And then we'll be moving on to the next application, which is Mariana Paredes Pelaez. Monica is the primary on this application. Let me reset the timer. It's me. Monica, whenever you're ready to begin, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so this project is Women Through the Looking Glass, and its proposal is to showcase 4 films directed by women to challenge stereotypes and biases. And part of this is built into trying to address social issues and inspire dialogue and action, and exploring themes of the female gaze kind of concept. So this project was it sort of had some pros and cons for me. I felt like the general intent was good, but it was lacking in detail in a few areas. Speaking about four films by women directors, none of them are named, which is fine, but there's also not really a process that I saw at least written out of like how are they going to be, how are they connected or whatever. So the other thing that that sort of gave me pause to an extent was just that this is very much based towards kind of uplifting women, which is, which is great. But in terms of this particular grant, I don't know that women just in general are named, at least, as one of the key constituents of this grant. So that sort of gave me a little bit of pause. The other thing I guess I wanted to mention, just from my personal experience, is that, as a composer, like as a female identifying composer or whatever, I get a little bristled when gender is used as kind of the main artistic theme, because it seems to sort of, there could be more depth than just, so anyway, so I sort of brought that into reading the application sometimes with that, but overall, I thought it was decent, but lacked some detail and a little bit of depth, I guess, from my own perspective.
Any additional comments?
When I read it, not unlike Monica, I wasn't clear if the plan was for 4 women filmmakers who were also BIPOC identifying, or in one of the other categories of interest or focus for the grant parameters. And I did understand from reading the narrative that had been a focus of the project proposal, the leaders' prior work. So I didn't know if maybe it was just a quirk of the grant writing, that maybe that clarity wasn't carried forward into this or not. So just had a little bit of uncertainty there for reading this application. But I did really appreciate, in the sort of scope of all the applications we've read, that this had a focus on film and bringing attention to the film industry and filmmakers in Austin.
Any additional comments? All right, if not, Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Okay, let me reset the timer. And we'll move on to the next application, Darcy Book. Monica will be the primary and Sandy will be the secondary. Monica, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Okay, so this project was Borderless Together Outside. So it was a series of nature meetups and art exhibitions. And so the proposal here was to support artist and educator honorariums for workshops, panels, marketing, community art events, etc., taking place at public parks. And I think part of the thrust of this application is that marginalized or vulnerable populations kind of feel unsafe and unwelcome in park and outdoor spaces, and so are less likely to use them and experience, the sort of benefits of them. So I think this project is based on reframing that. So I thought it was a really interesting application. For me, this kind of marked mid to low, in the sense of it was a little unclear if the applicant was sort of engaged already in the sort of key constituents groups and groups at risk of cultural erasure and everything. Like it's named in the application, but I don't really see much of the history there, and maybe there's more context that I'm missing. I also was a little confused about how they would actually reach this population, because it's not really necessarily addressed with a lot of clarity in in their programmatic reach and things like that. So this one had some, I think had some unique elements that I thought was really interesting, but I'm also, I'm curious if others had a different reading of it, because yeah, that I was scratching my head for some parts of this.
I had some similar thoughts as Monica. I wasn't quite clear who the applicant's constituency was. The applicant does name a few issue areas that they care about, but having an interest or creating programming around specific issues doesn't necessarily mean a project is by and for a specific constituency. I noticed that there was a lot of naming of and wanting to include and work with queer, refugee, and BIPOC communities, which is really great. But that doesn't necessarily mean intentional inclusion to me. It didn't quite feel like, you know, the activities and the intent of the project was centering the cultural interests, leadership, experience, and knowledge of those communities. Maybe speaking to maybe that's also part of the feeling like there wasn't enough detail to give me an understanding of what these activities would look like. And I think my last note was around, I think, you know, there is a lot of passion and interest about exploring land and the relationship that people have with land, and including BIPOC folks in that. And I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity or a missing piece to not specifically name and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous people and their experience and their knowledge in this topic.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this application?
I guess I would just add, well, and thank you, Sandy, that yeah, I really appreciated those comments. I guess I would just add that, you know, at one point the applicant mentions, like later on in the application, being like from the queer community. And I just, if that was a core element of this, I would have loved to see it addressed in earlier questions in a more clear way, because, you know, it kind of puts me in a position of trying to like infer different things for different answers based on something way later in the application. And anyway, if that is a core part of the kind of application, it would be good to have that addressed in for the questions that ask questions related to that.
Thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? All right. Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Okay, next up, if y'all will go ahead and finalize your scores for that applicant. And while you're doing that, go ahead and pull up LNS Crew Productions. That's our next application up for review. Bridget will be our primary for this application.
Okay, can y'all hear me okay? Okay, great. So this application, LNS Crew, Randall Jones, they're seeking $20,000 for an album titled Fasting, seeking support for the project of the artist in the process of putting together his next album called Fasting. It's currently slated to come out in late 2023 or early 24. The support would help him finish, record, mix, and master the album, as well as to fund the marketing plan for after it's released. And that would include an album release party. This application scored relatively high for me. I appreciated that the project would spotlight and celebrate hip hop as a part of the Austin music scene, which I think maybe could benefit from more attention. And I think the project lead mentions in the application that he grew up in communities that are at immediate risk of erasure, and ties them and the community members living there into the project at multiple points throughout the production and promotional plan. I also really liked seeing that the applicant shared and highlighted how much he personally had benefited from mentorship he received. And because of that, he aims to replicate that in the proposed project going forward by bringing people on that he can act in that role as. And then I noted a quote from the application. He says, "I am a musician born and raised in Austin, Texas, as a Black man from this community who grew up in the public housing projects such as Goodridge Place and Booker T. Washington Terraces. I strive to represent where I'm from, as well as the culture that I and my family came from. My goal is to inspire people from here and give them the feeling that they too can achieve their dreams." And that to me just felt like a really perfect encapsulation of what the grant parameters are. So that was something that really stuck with me.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this applicant? If there are no additional ones, Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and finalize our scores and pull up KB Brookins. Tarina will be the primary and Monica will be the secondary.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull up my notes.
Oh yeah, take your time.
So this application was focused on creating a poet laureate position in Austin. They speak a lot to there being past youth poet laureate positions, but really wanting to uplift the opportunity for there to be an Austin poet laureate position. I feel like they did a really good job of just demonstrating in their mission and their history of service. I had concerns around community voice and would have liked to see there be more description and the community involvement of kind of demonstrating buy-in and desire for there to be a poet laureate. I'm biased because I'm a poet, and so I inherently, like, it matters to me, but just wanting to see that more evidenced in Austin community feedback. I really liked the detail of the activities they described and the components of intersectionality and community relationships, and would have liked more budget history just from their past work. But overall, I liked the concept of the application, especially at least the potential for there to be a really good balance between it appealing to tourism as well as still being like very rooted in community.
Yeah, this proposal, I was a little bit medium to high, I guess. I like the idea of like an Austin Poet Laureate. I think they've really outlined that, that there could be a need for that and a benefit, like community benefit to that. But I found myself wondering if that really is something that should be run by an individual artist with not a lot of surrounding narrative about how other people would necessarily be involved in terms of the process, how they would be picked, what kind of activities they would do. Like there was a lot of, it seemed more like a very good idea that didn't have a full process in place. And I mean, often poet laureates are, run by the city or whatever. So to have it run by an individual artist just seemed a little, I worry that there wouldn't be enough like oversight of how the actual process would work. The other thing that I want to mention is in some of the answers, particularly in the budget, and I think the also in sort of the accessibility aspect, there was a lot of hypotheticals of like, we'll do this if it's necessary, or, you know, we can do this if it seems to be needed, or whatever. And to me, that's not really, it didn't give enough of a plan for how it would actually function. And so, yeah, I would just encourage the applicant to, yeah, provide more detail, provide a plan, because the actual idea of having a poet laureate, I mean, it's pretty unique in this, you know, we don't have a lot of ones that focus on poetry. And anyway, I think there could be something really special there if it was a little bit more detailed.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this applicant? Yes, Bridget.
I appreciated the attention in this one on growing the creative connections between the poetry communities and the queer and BIPOC communities in Austin, sort of bringing everybody into, you know, conversation connection. And on the accessibility side, if I'm remembering correctly, I also appreciated that they had attention for both in-person and virtual programming, which offers a whole nother range of accessibility, and so that there was some planning or thinking or forethought about how to do both.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you. Anne Marie.
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And we have one more application before our first break of the day. Nico is next. And Bridget is the primary and Torina is the secondary. Bridget, whenever you're ready, except I'm not, so let me reset my timer. Okay, I'm good to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. So Nico is asking for $25,000 to support a project that will expand their couture line by improving sewing operations, supporting seamstresses, tailors, pattern makers, and potentially also hiring a PR representative for the line. They aim to increase production capacity, empower local fashion community, and enhance brand visibility within the marketplace to generate funding for each branch of the line. They also mentioned wanting to add visibility and outreach for queer Latinx, for them as a queer Latinx designer and other creatives in the fashion industry in Austin. For me, this project proposal scored relatively high. I appreciated the spotlighting of fashion and couture as a creative industry, as well as economic engine in Austin, and also celebrating and supporting creatives in the industry that identify as queer and Latinx. I also valued the fact that the budget narrative and the breakdown helped me better understand the full scope of the project, because this isn't an industry I know very well. And the only thing that could have helped me further would be to maybe clarify, in the budget, there was a line item for payroll, as well as additional line items for the salary of the creative director, seamstresses, marketing, sales team, etc. And so I wasn't sure if payroll was a separate category for someone else, or if that was also for the individual team members. So that might just be, you know, me not having clarity on industry budgets and things. But again, this one scored relatively high for me.
I think for me, I struggled with this. After hearing some of Bridget's feedback, I think I want to go back through and like re-examine. But when I initially read through it, it was something that just based on what was emphasized, I felt I could see being a stronger candidate for like a business incubator grant, because it was very focused on how the funds can be utilized to improve the business. And I did like and appreciate how the line is focusing on centering Black queer women, but it didn't have the same emphasis on community voice in design as I would have liked to see. Let me see what else. I did appreciate that it created job opportunities. Would have liked to see the budget in the template provided. I like how they considered equity. And then as far as accessibility, I would have liked to see just like more intentional considerations towards that.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
I would just add under a few of the questions, but especially under the opportunity creation and community benefit, some of the way that the language is framed is very much like we, we could do this, or like it's very, very non-committal. And that, yeah, I would just encourage them to state what you plan to do.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Anne Marie.
Thank you. Please go ahead and finalize your scores. And at this time, we will take our first 15-minute break. So we'll be back at 10:46. Welcome back. As folks are coming back in, we just want to do like another quick reminder for the folks watching today that we are coming back from our first break for day two of individual and creative businesses panel 1. Reminder that panelists have already reviewed and scored all of these applications prior to today. They are able to make adjustments to their scores based on other panelists' feedback if they so choose. Additionally, panelists have been asked to score based only on the scoring rubric criteria, which is found in our Elevate Grant Program guidelines. We are not scoring on consensus, so panelists may have differing views on applications relating to the scoring rubric. They are going to be providing overall application scores and comments, not numerical scores, but overall application comments. They are able or have been asked to look beyond grantsmanship. So if the information answered to a question is found somewhere in the application, they are allowed and encouraged to use that for scoring, even if it's not readily accessible. They may use firsthand experience and website information if the website was provided. We don't have any conflicts of interest today with any of our panelists. What else? We are putting a maximum of 10 minutes for review for each application reviewed, and I'm timing that. That's the basic overview. So let's go ahead and get started for our next round of 6 applications to take a look at. Next one up for review is SIA G. Bridget will be the primary on this application. Bridget, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer once you begin speaking.
Great, okay. And I wasn't sure, is it SIA or SIA? The proposal is asking for $25,000 for SIA's Tiny Terrors Live, which they're proposing as an event series featuring 3 live episodes and 1 night. Local Austin performers will create horror and sci-fi narratives enriched with live and digital sound effects. Showcasing diversity, these episodes are going to be recorded live and then aired on SIA's podcast, bringing Austin's unique storytelling talent both to listeners within the city and outside of the city who could not attend a live performance. There's 4 components. It's script development, which collaborating with community writers. Rehearsals, casts representing multiple communities in Austin will come together to rehearse and prepare for the live performance. The performance itself, which will be multiples, and then finally workshops to facilitate further understanding and foster dialogue about the featured themes. Overall, SIA's mission is to promote inclusive storytelling using the medium of podcasting. And for herself as a Black LGBTQ woman, she's committed to amplifying marginalized voices sidelined in mainstream creative narratives such as horror and sci-fi. This proposal scored high for me. I really appreciated that the community involvement was centered from the start of the project. Local writers and actors come together to collaborate with SIA to create the narratives, so that demonstrates local relevance to me. The collaborators shaped the script, the performances, and the project's overall direction and end result, which really stood out to me as being collaborative, kind of in the crux of the project. Community workshops, talkbacks, and discussions are also mentioned as being a part of the process, so I feel like it's a two-way conversation. I also really appreciated the project's amplification of Black and LGBTQ+ community voices, especially considering that horror and sci-fi as genres haven't really had those voices as part of their history on the creative side, so that's great. And it sounded like a necessary and creative project to me. I did also appreciate the details in the budget narrative and the considerations about multiple language and translation in the closed captioning, both at the performance level and the recast of the podcast level. So I think they're thinking about some accessibility considerations.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this applicant? If not, Anne Marie.
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And then we'll move on to our next applicant, Christian Mendez Aguirre. Sandy will be the primary and Bridget will be the secondary. Let me reset the timer. And then Sandy, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
All right, so for this proposal, the applicant hopes to create a bilingual theater programming, which would include a play production, a showing of a work in progress, 3 artistic workshops on bilingual storytelling, and 2 trainings for docents who lead tours at the Botanical Gardens, which is where the programming would take place, to receive arts-based and culturally inclusive facilitation of science education. I scored this application in the mid-high range. I really like the range of different activities included. I really like that it is bilingual programming. And I was really impressed how the applicant has a long history of putting on productions for the community that explores important stories, themes, or issues within the Austin Latina community. I scored this applicant in the mid-high range. I really liked a lot of their work and I was impressed by a lot of their work, but sometimes when I was reading through the application and looking through the responses, I would have this thought of like, this is really great, but it doesn't quite meet what I wanted to see. So for example, it's really clear that the applicant cares about creating opportunities for communities made marginalized, but I feel like there could be a little bit more in like having some shared leadership in their work. So for instance, there was a note that often artists of colors, especially Latinas, are brought in as assistant directors, but I feel like there could be an opportunity for even more shared leadership. So like maybe artists of color or Latinas could be brought on earlier in the process, possibly as producers and directors or in roles that make a bigger impact on the production. It would also be great if community members or production members could help inform decisions around hiring and script selection, which the applicant noted that they take on themselves typically. And this could apply for not only the productions, but the workshops and other community events that the proposal talks about. And then as for intersectionality, the applicant talks about how they often work with cis women and queer folks. And I think it's really great that they found collaborators that they can trust and work with. But to me, like working with these groups doesn't necessarily mean intersectionality is centered. Like to me, intersectionality is about remembering like even when people share an identity, each individual, like knowing that each individual has different needs, experiences, ways of access, and other identities to be considered in order to intentionally include them. So the applicant does make a note that they would like to connect more with neurodivergent, disabled, and or deaf or hard of hearing communities. And I just wanted to know more about what that would look like.
This application scored relatively high for me. Two things just to add to what Sandy's saying, which I totally all makes sense and resonates with my notes. I did appreciate that there was the sort of concept of teaching the teachers, as somebody who's worked in museums for a long time, the idea of specialized training for the volunteer docents, so that there's a legacy left behind after the project is completed, where the docents are able to bring in a more expansive frame of reference to their work as docents, would be beneficial in the field of science education at the Botanical Garden. And then also a second point to mention, in the proposal, they talk about the fact that programming around the issues of environmentalism tends to be by white and or English speaking authors, and that this would invert some of that by lifting up and highlighting the reality that Spanish speaking and Hispanic and immigrant communities also care about the environment, and a way to kind of spotlight that. So those were two things that just wanted to mention.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this applicant?
Yeah, I would just add I liked this one. I thought it was pretty strong. I just wanted to make a note on there's one question I had on the budget side that didn't totally match up, which was it generally the budget looked reasonable, but there weren't costs associated for the 2 workshops included, or if they were, I couldn't tell what they were. And those are talked about in the narrative. So I just would have liked to see that match up a little closer.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, if not, Anne Marie.
Thank you. If you'll go ahead and finalize your scores, we'll move on to the next application, which is Javier Jara. Bridget is our primary and Tarina is our secondary. So Bridget, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Great. So Javier Jara is asking for $25,000 for a project called Tríptico Memorias del Camino, a concert series showcasing the diversity of Latin American music in Austin. With the first concert, they'll team up with Austin Unconducted for an 18-piece orchestral rendition of Our Rhythms, Our Voices musical project. The second concert will be a night of singer-songwriters from both Mexico and Central Texas. And then the third and final concert will feature Latin big band music with Felipe El Tiburon Barrero, his orchestra, and Javier on vocals. This one scored medium high for me. I thought the project overall fit well with the Elevate grant parameters. In terms of thinking through accessibility expansion for musical performances, I thought it was good to see that some of the concerts were planned to take place in venues that offer hearing loop technology. In the marketing plan, I appreciated seeing a targeting of Spanish language radio and other media outlets to expand the reach of awareness. And then related to the intersectionality question, I also appreciated that the proposal was working to center Indigenous collaborators along with the Latinx community. In terms of the budget, for me, it helped to see how the proposed funds would go into the community and directly support musicians and other creatives working in Austin. And I also appreciated seeing the thinking that went into or is going into questions around affordability and ticket price offsets that could be possible, as mentioned in the application.
Yeah, we had very similar feedback. I really enjoyed this application. I really valued the specificity of their constituents, especially the focus, the variety in music. And I feel like a lot of times with Latinx, like things that are arts and cultured, a lot of times different groups within that community get lumped into one. So I really liked that it was specific and like, here are the different cultures within these different communities. They did a great job of articulating their history of service, their mission, shared leadership and representation within that leadership. Their marketing plan was really clear and I appreciated that. Their budget did a great job. So yeah, I really liked this application.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, if not, Anne Marie.
All right, let's finalize scores and we'll move on to the next application. Buenos Dias Music. Buenos Dias Music. Monica is a primary. And Monica, whenever you are ready to begin.
Okay, so Buenos Dias Music. So this project is dedicated to supporting organizational and facility enhancements. So it's about the local Austin music community. to ensure an elevated experience for visiting musicians. So this is very much about elevating the reputation of the organization itself, the Buenos Dias Music, within the Austin music business community. So this one, this one was sort of a mid score for me. I think the actual application, the support material and budget and everything like that, there was a lot of things that seemed clear, and they had a good track record of performance. The actual answers for some of the narrative questions were quite broad, and so I was a little unclear about how some of the actual questions were addressed. You know, they talk about, you know, fostering a diverse and inclusive community, and, you know, I have no reason to doubt that, but there's not really a lot of examples or a lot of information about how that actually kind of functions. And I had a question about, you know, what actually are the project activities related to this? Was it not quite clear and not very specific on a lot of points? And this was, I mean, I mentioned the budget before, but the budget itself was very clear and very, you know, detailed and good, but then it was hard to sort of make it match with the very broad kind of generic application itself. So that was kind of my general impressions.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant?
One thing for me that I noted down was in the language accessibility section, they talk about non-English speaking communities. I would have loved to see some specificity there about which other languages they were looking to include or were hoping to be a part of their outreach and programming.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, Anne-Marie.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Please finalize your scores. And then the next application up for review is Neighborhood Molino. Monica is the primary and Tarina will be the secondary. We reset the timer, and Monica, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Okay, so Neighborhood Molino, this is a culinary arts organization. They focus on educational workshops, social equity, food access, creative expression, and community through the traditional art of grinding masa. So their goal is to provide affordable access and education about culturally important nutritious foods to the community in Austin, while working with indigenous farmers in the US South and Mexico. So this one was a really interesting proposal. It seemed very tied to the community, and you know, with a pretty clear mission of, you know, uplifting kind of heirloom masa and you know, and providing educational and tools to implement the ingredient. So, you know, the thing I sort of struggled with a little bit was how to make it coalesce with like an arts grant, in the sense that you know, trying to figure out how that fit in this sort of grant opportunity, but at the same time, the sort of like uplifting the sort of cultural aspect, I think was I could see it. It wasn't always totally clearly articulated, but I thought there was some interesting stuff there. Yeah, I think that, yeah, so this one was sort of a mid-range score for me. I thought there's some, like I said, some interesting stuff. But yeah, just would be curious to hear what others think as well.
Yeah, I really liked this application. I enjoyed the cultural arts piece of it. I feel like it made it really unique, especially with it focusing on Indigenous community. I really appreciated their history of service. They did a great job with their budget and demonstrating intersectionality. I appreciated the job creation aspect of it. I think the only thing I would have liked to see more of is that their marketing, like more details and planning in their marketing, especially with it being more culinary arts and not what comes to mind with traditional arts, and looking at potential. And even though it's very well rooted in community, I think there was an opportunity for it to be like well marketed for tourism, because it is pretty unique in that educational aspect. And so I really enjoyed the project, and yeah, was glad to see the submission.
Excuse me. Thank you. Any additional comments?
This was one that I ranked pretty highly. For me, I appreciated the centering of traditional or ancestral knowledge in the culinary arts, and the way that that can have contemporary relevance in a food city like Austin. I also appreciated the input being sought from Latinx and Indigenous communities at the workshop, supper club level, etc. And I thought this one stood out to me because it had an ongoing nature, so it would continue to have a positive benefit for the communities where it was active kind of indefinitely and open. And I can't remember if it was a submitted work sample or through their website, but the inclusion of the article from Texas Monthly about the sort of importance of this type of work and the growth in the sector was also helpful in kind of understanding the scope of the project. So again, this was one I ranked relatively highly.
Thank you. Any further comments? All right, if not, Anne Marie.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and finalize scores and get ready to move on to our next application. Mary Jane Garza. Tarina will be the primary, and we'll get started as soon as Tarina is ready to go. I'm resetting the timer. All right, whenever you're ready.
Give me 1 second to pull up my notes. For whatever reason, I thought we did this one yesterday, but so Mary Jane Garza had proposed a project to, about, sorry, it's in my Excel sheet and I'll smush it together.
No worries, take your time.
So this one was about a documentary for the East End artist Peter Ortiz, longtime resident of the Montopolis. So she's a past recipient of funding from the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division. And so it sounds like building on some existing work, commemorating Peter Ortiz. I struggled because the leadership and decision making for this application felt very concentrated. It was pretty intersectional and and centering Latino and LGBTQ communities. And there were mentorship opportunities and job creation components that I appreciated. Overall, I think initially the focus of the documentary being about one person was something that I had pause about, but I can appreciate it going so in depth about one person who's such a significant local figure. But then just kind of struggling with, I would have liked to see more shared leadership and decision making.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments on this applicant? If not, Anne Marie.
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And now we are on to our second break of the morning. We will come back and complete the last 5 for panel 1, day 2 of individuals and creative businesses. Let's meet back here at 11:27. All right, so up next for review is Torco Rover. Sandy Lamb will be the primary and Torina will be the secondary. Let me get the timer set up. And Sandy, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
All right, so this proposal is for a project to transform the applicant's backyard space into a performance space so that they can produce 4 individual full-length shows, each directed by a local low-income LGBTQIA artist with queer designers and performers. So it sounded like that the applicants currently use their space for queer community gathering, which is really great. I like the idea of creating an accessible, inclusive space for queer folks, and that it's something that they've already been doing. The project feels very rooted in community and community responsive. It's part of why they started hosting this space, because they saw a need for their community to have a space like this. And the applicants have a clear history of serving the queer community and creating art. I also really like the emphasis on, wanting to bring in queer artists and especially considering artists of color. I think because of that, if there's such an interest in bringing on queer BIPOC artists, I think it'd be really cool if someone in their main leadership team was a queer BIPOC person. But overall, I really like this project. The only reason it didn't score as high for me is because since this grant really has a focus on serving communities made most marginalized by systemic racism, and this project has a focus on queer communities.
I'd agree with a lot that was shared, even though it doesn't focus as specifically on BIPOC communities. I did appreciate the focus on queer communities as a demographic that is at immediate risk of erasure within Austin. I like the uniqueness and the intimacy of it being like in someone's backyard and really bringing people into the community. I feel like they gave a really detailed marketing plan, which stood out to me because I haven't seen that as strongly or as well detailed in some other applications. And I think my initial concern was, how is this reflective of, it's clearly reflective of the community. How is it also active in the overarching arts and culture scene of Austin in the context of drawing tourism? And I feel like having the strong marketing detailed out kind of helps put those concerns at ease as a very like niche kind of event for someone who's not in Austin or based in Austin to be excited to come out to see when coming to Austin.
Thank you. Any additional comments?
Yeah, I would just say that Initially, I thought I might be concerned with the backyard aspect in terms of would it be open to the public, but I agree with Tarina that it's really strongly there's a really good plan in their marketing, and they have a lot of community partnerships, and that sort of assuaged my fears on that.
Thank you. Bridget?
I also wanted to share that I appreciated their use of an open call component. I know open calls can be a lot of work and getting the word out and reviewing all the submissions and things like that, but I think the very positive upside is that it helps networking and growing communities, because you become aware of people who maybe weren't on your radar before the open call. So that stood out to me in a positive way.
Thank you very much. Anne Marie?
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next application, Mercury McKnight. Monica is the primary and Bridget is the secondary. Let me reset the timer. And Monica, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Okay, so this project from Mercury McKnight is called Fair Youth. And so it is a visual album and queer themed release party with the idea to celebrate LGBTQ and and POC voices through music, dance, and poetry. There is a lot going on in this proposal. It was very energetic, and I had a lot of detail. I had some confusion. I marked this quite high. I liked it. I thought it was really interesting. The sort of combining of very seemingly quite different things of Shakespearean poetry and and hip hop and R&B and mud wrestling, and there was a lot going on. So I was very, very intrigued. I was slightly confused about how all these things would actually work together. But it seemed to be very centered from Black, non-binary, queer individual who's connected to their community and has a lot of different things kind of going on. Admittedly, maybe not super established in some of these arenas yet. But in general, I thought it was really interesting and intriguing. And honestly, I just am curious, what they would kind of do with it. The one thing I want to point out is that the accommodations and sort of accessibility answers could have been maybe a little stronger. But they speak about using Google Translate for their ESL kind of component, and I just had a question mark. I was like, is that like how would that work exactly? But yeah, anyway, I thought this one was maybe a tad confusing, but also very intriguing.
Okay, this one I ranked as a relatively high. I appreciated that the project was amplifying the voices of queer BIPOC creatives in Austin and creating safe and inclusive spaces that centered in intersectionality. And then there were two components as a result of it being a visual album, or a part of the project being a visual album, that I just wanted to mention. They talk about the fact that they can showcase iconic Austin locations, highlighting the city's unique beauty and tourist appeal, which will bring attention to the cultural and artistic vibrancy of the community. So I think that was something that stood out to me in a positive way. And then also, as a result of it being a visual album, planning had gone into the use of various technologies, including Dolby Atmos, for expanding accessibilities. So I felt like there was a real creative vision behind this project, but also consideration on some of the nuts and bolts issues.
All right, try again. Thank you. Any additional comments? If not, Anne Marie.
All right, finalize your scores. And then we'll move on to our next application. All right, Layla Bella is up next. Tarina will be our primary. Tarina, whenever you're ready, let me reset the timer. Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So I thought that this was a really cool application. It was a multicultural Gothic operetta, using instruments from the Middle East and from Africa. I feel like this proposal had a very well demonstrated history of service and rootedness in the community. And I feel like they did a good job of speaking to some of their international accomplishments and connections while it not taking away from or being in lieu of them collaborating like really intimately with the Austin community. For this one, as with like a lot of them, I would have liked to see stronger marketing details. But overall, and when it came to accessibility and including multilingual subtitles and them giving very specific examples of how they would make their the operetta is accessible. I really appreciate it. Overall, I really liked this application, especially for its uniqueness, or maybe it's unique to me because I hadn't seen something like that before.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this applicant?
Yeah, I feel like this was, for me, was a little bit on the lower end, only because I mean, I love like the idea of a multicultural like Gothic operetta. The actual idea, I think it's great. But I didn't really see like an opera's, you know, there wasn't really like any partnerships with like any, you know, like maybe like an independent opera company or whatever. It just, some of the answers seemed very hypothetical on how they would pull this off, and without kind of experience or a partnership with, you know, with a community that does have the experience. I guess my concern was just the feasibility, but the actual like project itself was it seemed like a little too early in its process at this stage, but I thought there was some great intent there.
Any additional comments? All right, Anne Marie.
Okay, next up, finalize your scores and then bring up Yulia Lanina. Tarina is the primary and Sandy is the secondary. And one moment, I'll reset this. And whenever you're ready, Tarina.
So for this one, I was impressed by the artist's work. They're very well established nationally and internationally, but I didn't see how they clearly reflected the Austin community in their work. They had like pretty good components of intersectionality. I would have liked to see more like intentional like accessibility when it came to individuals from the disability community. But I was really interested that they had mentioned having their work translated into 3 different languages. So overall, it didn't score the highest for me, but there are components of it that I liked.
I scored this applicant mid-high. I really like the topic and what they wanted to explore in the project. I wasn't quite sure how community input would be involved in the development of the project, but it seemed like there were cool elements where like the community would be like, it seemed like there was cool elements of audience interaction, which was cool. The applicant talks about wanting to hire collaborators, but I wasn't sure if these collaborators would come from the community or from the constituency they wanted to serve. And aside from hiring a marketing specialist, I just wanted to know more about how they would promote and make sure that their constituency knew about this project.
And sorry, I forgot to
Go
give an
ahead.
overview of what this project is. It's called People of Wills. It's a 45-minute live solo performance with costumes, projected animations, handmade props, and centering topics around chronic illness, trauma, and motherhood and non-normative identity and sexuality.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, thank you. Anne Marie?
Okay, go ahead and finalize your scores. And we are at our final application of the day. Well, y'all's day. There's another panel right after this one. The last panel for application in individual creative business panel, day 2, round 1. Our panel 1 is Black Fruit. Sandy is the primary and Monica is the secondary. And Sandy, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
So this project wants to connect local creatives with Austin's Web3 community together by throwing a series of events, which would include hosting a big arts festival. I think the biggest thing for me for this application was it didn't really feel like it was centering or wanting to create programming for communities at risk of cultural erasure and or displacement. Since it seemed like a lot of the focus was about local creatives in general and the Web3 community in general. I think things that I liked was I could tell the applicant has a lot of passion for art and tech and the communities that they've made around these fields. I thought it was really great that the leadership of this project was BIPOC. It's late. We're at the end. I liked how the majority of the leadership of this project was BIPOC folks, mostly women. I think the application could have been a lot stronger if maybe they focused on like 2 or 3 specific activities they wanted to do and then giving detail about those 2 or 3 specific activities, how those activities are relevant to their community and how those activities meet the needs of their communities. And I also wish the applicant had spent some time thinking about and considering intersectionality and accessibility for their programming.
Yeah, I felt similarly. This one was marked a little bit on the lower end for me, mainly because I felt like it might be an eligible project, but the actual responses didn't really necessarily answer or didn't really speak to the questions asked in a very meaningful way. And they were very, very broad about serving the whole community, and I mean, which is, fine. And doesn't really mention how like voices will be included. Just overall kind of lacked detail and accessibility and marketing. And the budget didn't balance as well. So anyway, those were kind of my, like, I think there was some good intent here, but just not a lot of detail about how individuals would be actually served in any kind of direct way.
And before we move on to any additional comments, I just wanted to say that we did not require that the budgets be balanced. So I just want to make that known. That was not necessarily a requirement. However, that has been a requirement in the past. So I feel it's probably likely that most applications probably presented an application that was balanced, but it was not a requirement in this program's iteration.
Oh, that's a good clarification. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Okay, if not, Anne Marie.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was our final panel application for this panel 1 of individuals and creative businesses. Just some few things to note for any applicants that are still watching. Awards will be announced in early September. You may request your comments and scores after the awards have been announced. These panel review sessions will also be posted on the Elevate webpage. So in the near future, so be looking out for those if you'd like your colleagues to watch them or you want to share them with other folks. You're welcome or rewatch for future improvements. And for now, I would welcome if any of the panelists today or Patricia, our facilitator, would like to make any final closing remarks. The floor is open.
I just want to share a quick note of appreciation for everyone who submitted. I know that can be a really time-consuming process, and I want that to be honored as much as possible. And so even if the criteria for the specific grant didn't necessarily honor like what the fullness of your work, just wanting to like really affirm that like it doesn't speak to your work by itself. It's how much does it align specifically with this criteria, and hoping that no one feels limited to what opportunities align and which don't.
I think that's so well said, Tarina, because most, if not all of us as panelists have also been grant applicants. And so I think there's a lot of empathy and understanding for how much effort goes into creating these applications, and the range of creativity and the projects, the dynamism of the projects really stood out to me. So it was a pleasure to read through them. Thanks for everyone's work. And then of course, also thank you, Anne Marie, Jesus, Patricia, everybody on the City of Austin team who helped us in our process. It was really great to work with all of you. And my thanks to the prior readers, as well as all of the panelists who have been going through the process. I really learned a lot from the conversations.
Yeah, I would say that this, I've been on a number of panels over the years, and this one was in some ways in the evaluation process was one of the most challenging that I think I've ever done. And it really challenged me personally of like how to really go with to match all these like amazing applications, such a breadth of individuals with what this grant program is hoping to achieve. And I guess I just wanted to thank all the applicants who really, all of them just in general, but especially, to recognize that there's really like a beauty in the struggle of grappling with some of these questions, and, those that, took the time to sort of like really think about it and not just necessarily, just take the time to sit with it and answer it in a genuine way, even if it wasn't perfect. That's the kind of work that moves us forward. So yeah, and thank you to the other panelists. I learned a lot from you as well.
Could have gone first. I don't have anything clever to say. I'm in general just really thankful for this experience and really grateful. I feel like a lot of the process was designed to be very inclusive and center the communities that need it the most. So I was really appreciative of that. And I learned a lot from the other panelists as well. So thank you so much. And I think just like reading through the applications and getting to learn more about artists and art projects in Austin, I feel very inspired and so excited and happy that I live in this city and that there's all this exciting work that's happening. And yeah, thank you to all applicants and artists who are doing this work.
Well, Sandy, you didn't have to be clever. You just had to be the lead in for my comments. So I want to say, first of all, thank you to all of you for the tremendous amount of work I know that you put into and reviewing all of these applicants and these applications, and doing so in the spirit that the city set up and aligned, which is to make sure that there was an equity across the board, and making sure that those who might not have previously had access to be considered for funding like this did so in a very not fair, but equitable, more than fairness, right? We know it's more than fairness, but in an equitable manner. And so thank you for honoring that in all the work that you've done. And for the city for allowing me to sit in and eavesdrop on some great conversations and learning a lot about what's going on in our city with our artists. So thank you all once again for everything that you've done. Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Yes, and reiterating thanks to all the panelists and facilitators for participating. We know it's a lot of work, and thank you to all the applicants for submitting such excellent applications. We're looking forward to hearing what the rest of this panel process has to come. And just as a quick debrief for our panelists, we can just want to go over a couple things with you guys because you may have some outstanding questions or anything at the end as this process for y'all's panel comes to an end. Panelists payments will be issued